Welcome to Starbound. If you're tired of AI-generated slop and want real, human storytelling, please subscribe and support this channel. My name is General G, and I'll be your narrator. Let's get into today's story. Davian Kale had come to believe that the universe expressed its grandest cruelties not with a bang, but with a boarding announcement. The automated voice, a cheerful synthetic soprano that grated on his last nerve, echoed through the cavernous concourse of Terminus 4. Now boarding groups 1 through 4 for the freighter The Drifting Sky, departing for the Eridanus Delta system. Please have your credentials ready. The voice, engineered for helpfulness, felt to Davian like a ticking clock, each syllable a reminder of how close they were, how much could still go wrong. "That's us, Dad," his 6-year-old daughter, Elena, said, her small voice a beacon of seriousness in the surrounding chaos. She poked a suspicious smear on the permacrete with the toe of her boot, a smear that shifted from oil-slick violet to murky green under the station lights. An expression of intense scientific curiosity marked her face. "The floor is sticky. I think it's old food, or maybe someone's feelings leaked out. This place seems leaky." Davian managed a weak smile, the expression feeling unfamiliar on his tired face. A muscle long out of use. "Feelings, huh? Well, this place is designed to make everyone's feelings leak." He nudged her gently toward the designated bay, his hand resting on the small backpack that contained everything she owned in the known universe. "Come on, kiddo. They'll be calling our group any minute now. No more sticky floors, I promise." It was a promise he desperately needed to keep, perhaps more for himself than for her. For 6 years, his life had been a series of no mores. No more staying in one place for longer than a standard rotation. No more using their real names. No more looking back. This stop was the end of the line, the final page of a book he was desperate to close. Eridanus Delta 4, an independent colony world so far off the main hyperspace lanes, it was practically a rumor. A place famous for its privacy laws and its utter blissful obscurity. He spent the last of the accessible funds, a parting gift that had felt more like a curse, on 2 one-way tickets. The air in Terminus 4 carried the mingled scents of the chemical tang of air scrubbers, scorched metal, and 1,000 different species body odor, all combining into a unique perfume of desperation. A neon sign above a noodle bar across the concourse would occasionally sputter and die, plunging a section of the crowd into momentary darkness before buzzing back to life with a sound like a mechanical groan. It was a miserable, transient place for miserable, transient people. It was perfect. Elena wrinkled her nose, a gesture so familiar it made his heart ache. "Does the new place have trees, Dad? Real ones? Not the plastic ones from Outpost Kilo that smelled like sad bananas." "It has an entire planet of them, Elena," he said, the promise of it a balm on his frayed soul. The words were a prayer he'd recited to himself for months, a mantra against the fear. "So many trees they haven't even finished naming them all. And dirt! You can get as much dirt on your clothes as you want, and nobody will ever tell us we have to leave again." A genuine gap-toothed grin spread across her face. "Deal." Then the light changed. The change was absolute. The entire vast viewport at the end of the concourse, which looked out onto the inky black dotted with the slow ballet of docking ships, simply went dark. A shadow had fallen over them, so intense it felt like a personal eclipse, a hand blotting out the stars. The sudden quiet was a physical presence. Every throat had tightened, every head had turned. The cacophony of 1,000 conversations, the clatter of cargo drones, the hiss of pneumatic doors, it all just stopped. Everyone, from the gelid baggage handler, its upper pairs of arms frozen above a cargo crate while its lower pair went limp, to an entity of coalesced light that wavered, its negotiations forgotten, turned to stare. The station, a place of constant motion, was now a frozen tableau. Descending from the blackness, resolving into sharp, overwhelming detail, was a ship. The vessel was an obelisk of polished, light-devouring alloy trimmed in gold. A kilometer-long declaration of power that seemed to warp the very fabric of space around it. Its design was elegant, lethal, and utterly unmistakable. The Valkyr Imperial flagship, the Sovereign Blade. A cold shock went through Davian's veins. His hand tightened on Elena's shoulder, a reflexive, primal urge to shield her from the sight. No, not here, not now. After all this time, how? The question was a scream in his mind. Before the stunned silence could break, the main entrance to the concourse slid open with a deferential hiss. Station security officers in their drab gray uniforms scurried into view, forming a nervous perimeter. Their faces pale. They were an honor guard of apprehension. Through the corridor they cleared. A phalanx of Valkyr royal guards marched. Their armor was the color of a dying star, and each step fell in perfect, silent unison with the others. They moved as an extension of a single, implacable will. The crowd melted away from their path, a wave of instinctual fear creating a clear line from the entrance directly to Docking Bay Gamma 9, directly to him. Davian's heart hammered against his ribs. He fought the urge to run, a useless instinct honed over 6 years of looking over his shoulder. He had run for 6 years. This was what the end of the line actually looked like. The guards stopped a respectful 5 meters away. Their leader, a tall Valkyr with a silver scar bisecting one tuft ear, stepped forward. He held up a hand, producing a data slate that glowed with some high-level diplomatic seal. The station security chief took one look at it, swallowed hard, and gave a jerky nod, waving his people back. They were on their own. The Valkyr's chromatic eyes, swirling pools of gold and violet, were fixed on Davian. He didn't shout. His voice was a calm, resonant baritone that carried easily in the unnatural quiet. Davian Kale. The name felt alien, a ghost's name resurrected in the worst possible place. By order of Her Imperial Majesty, Imperatrix Soria, you are to come with us. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, sluiced through Davian's veins, washing away the bone-deep weariness of 1,000 sleepless nights. He shoved Elena behind his back, his body a flimsy shield against an empire. No, he said. His voice was quiet, steady. We have tickets. We're leaving. The lead guard, Praetor Cassian, didn't move. His expression, a mask of feline stoicism, didn't flicker. He didn't reach for a weapon or issue a threat. Valkyr, of his rank, didn't need to. Their power was implicit in every polished plate of their armor. This is not a request, Mr. Kale. It's still a no. Davian's mind raced, churning through impossible scenarios. He could cause a scene, a human screaming about being kidnapped by the Valkyr. Imperium in a public station would cause a diplomatic incident, but it would also put Elena in the middle of a firefight with soldiers who looked like they could tear a shuttle door off its hinges. There were no good options. There never had been. Praetor Cassian seemed to sense his internal calculus. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Her Majesty anticipated your reluctance. He raised a gauntleted hand and tapped a device on his wrist. A column of blue light solidified into a life-size holographic figure. Imperatrix Soria stood in what looked like a private study. She wore no crown, no elaborate imperial robes, just a simple dark tunic of some velvet-like material. He remembered her beauty, but 6 years of rule had forged new lines around her eyes and mouth, like fine cracks in a priceless statue. The weight of an empire was a heavy thing to carry, and it showed. Her chromatic eyes, the same impossible gold and violet as her guards, found him instantly. Her eyes held none of the imperial distance he expected. They were the eyes of a woman staring across a chasm of her own making. "Davian?" she said, her voice a low, strained murmur that was for him alone, yet it seemed to echo in the vast silence. "Please, don't make me do this by force. Not in front of her." The synthetic soprano cut through the silence. "Final gate call for the Drifting Sky, groups 1 through 4, doors closing in 2 minutes. Davian glanced down at the datapad clutched in his hand, the screen glowing with their 2 boarding passes. It was his whole plan. his desperate prayer for a quiet life, condensed into a few kilobytes of data. Then he looked back at the hologram of the most powerful woman in the galaxy, a woman who was begging him with an expression of profound, soul-deep pain. And finally, he looked down at Elena, who had peeked out from behind his legs, her gaze fixed past the intimidating guards and gawking crowd to the image of the beautiful, sad lady made of light, her mother. Defeat was a bitter, familiar taste. He couldn't fight an empire in the middle of a spaceport. A public refusal wouldn't be an act of defiance. It would be an act of reckless endangerment. He had one card left to play, and it was the only one that mattered: Elena's safety. He gave a sharp, defeated nod. The tension in his shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him like water from a cracked cup. Fine. Soria's image flickered as her composure broke for a fraction of a second. He saw the tension leave her shoulders, her form seeming to shrink slightly as a profound wave of relief washed over her. "Thank you, Davian. Cassian will escort you." The hologram dissolved into a shower of blue pixels. Cassian gestured toward the main entrance. "This way, Mr. Kale." Davian picked Elena up, holding her tight against his chest. As they walked, flanked by the silent royal guard, the crowd parted before them, their whispers a rising tide of speculation. He could feel their stares, 100 strangers watching the most private moment of his life unfold like a public spectacle. He buried his face in Elena's hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, a tiny anchor in a sea of chaos. "Dad?" Elena whispered into his ear, her voice small. "Who was that lady?" "That," Davian whispered back, his voice thick with a grief he thought he'd long since buried, "is a long story, kiddo. A very long story." The escort through the corridors of the Sovereign Blade was a silent, suffocating journey. The ship's interior was as intimidating as its hull: sleek, dark metal alloys, glowing strips of golden light, and an unnerving quiet that spoke of a system without wasted energy or motion. Valkyr crew members, clad in elegant gray uniforms, would stop and bow their heads as they passed, their chromatic eyes lingering on him and Elena. He felt less like a guest and more like a captured specimen being transported to a lab. They were led not to a guest suite, but to the throne room. It was designed to make a person feel small, and it succeeded brilliantly. The ceiling soared 30 meters overhead, a vaulted dome that displayed a real-time star chart of their current location. Polished black marble floors reflected the starlight, giving the impression of walking on the void itself. The room was a statement of power, carefully crafted piece of psychological warfare. Soria stood before the hematite throne, a solitary figure in the vastness. As Davian and Elena were brought before her, she raised a hand. "Leave us," she commanded. Cassian bowed his head. "Majesty?" He and the other guards retreated, the massive doors hissing shut behind them with a sound of utter finality. They were alone. The moment the door sealed, Soria took a hesitant step forward, her Imperial mask visibly strained. The Imperatrix was gone, replaced by a woman who looked as lost as he felt. "Davian, Save it!" He cut her off, his voice flat and hard. He set Elena down, keeping a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sure the Imperial speechwriters worked all night on this one. Let me guess. Regrettable necessities? For the good of the Imperium? Did you focus group the apology?" Her face tightened, a barb hitting its mark. "It was for the good of you, of our daughter." "Our daughter?" he shot back, gesturing around the cavernous room. "Yeah, this looks like a great place for a kid. Very homey. Does the giant soul-crushing chair double as a high chair, or is it just for crushing souls?" The reunion was a train wreck. Two people separated by 6 years and a galaxy of pain, talking past each other. He refused to let her see the terrified man underneath the anger. She seemed incapable of speaking in anything but the formal cadences of her office. It was Elena who broke the standoff. She squirmed free of Davian's grasp and took a few cautious steps forward, her tiny figure dwarfed by the scale of the room. She looked up at Soria, tilting her head. Then, with the blunt honesty only a child possesses, she paraphrased a line she'd heard far too many times. "My dad said you were busy," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration, "with big planet government stuff. He says it's nonsense." The simple, unadorned truth of it, delivered with such earnest gravity, did what no Imperial decree could. It bypassed Soria's defenses entirely. She didn't crumble, not yet, but a deep, shuddering breath escaped her, and the rigid line of her shoulder softened. The Imperatrix was still there, but the mother was looking out through her eyes. "He's not wrong," Soria said, her voice softer than before. "It often is." Elena, ever practical, just nodded. "Okay. Are you finished now? Can we go to the new planet? Dad promised real trees." The simple question, the innocent belief that this was all just a temporary delay, was a blow more painful than any of Davian's insults. Soria's composure finally began to fray at the edges. "I'm so sorry, little one," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't think we can." Davian watched, his anger and his heartbreak wrestling for dominance. He hated her for doing this, for ripping the quiet future from his grasp. But seeing the raw, undisguised pain on her face as she looked at their daughter, a part of him that he thought had died 6 years ago ached in sympathy. He felt trapped, not just in a spaceship, but between a past he couldn't escape and a future he couldn't imagine. Before Soria could break down completely, Cassian's voice came softly through a hidden speaker. "Majesty, your presence is required on the bridge. An urgent matter requiring the summit coordinates." It was a fiction, Davian knew, a prearranged rescue. Soria visibly composed herself, seizing the excuse. "I must attend to this. We will speak more in my quarters. Cassian will show you." She turned and swept from the room without another word, a monarch retreating from a battle she was losing. Their private quarters were a stark contrast to the oppressive grandeur of the throne room. They were spacious, but they were also lived in. Bookshelves were filled with data slates and carefully preserved behind shielded glass. A collection of actual paper books, ancient Terran artifacts that must have cost a planetary treasury. A plush, velvet-covered sofa was draped with a woven blanket. It was a room that belonged to a person, not a monument. It made Davian's carefully constructed defenses feel brittle. Elena was immediately drawn to a datapad left on a low table. It lit up as she approached, a friendly cartoon star winking on the screen. "Hello," a cheerful voice chirped. "I'm Sparky, your personal guide to the Sovereign Blade. What adventure shall we have today?" "A guide?" Elena whispered, fascinated. "A babysitter," Davian muttered. Soria entered, having shed the weight of the throne room. "He's connected to the guest systems. I've linked his permissions to my own, so he can take you anywhere you want to go and keep you safe. He can answer your questions, get you food, play games." Once Elena was absorbed in a conversation with Sparky about whether stars get tummy aches, the silence between the adults returned, heavy and fraught. "How did you find us?" Davian asked, his voice low. "After all this time, today, of all days." "Your escape was what led me to you," Soria said, her voice tired. "That parting gift I left you? The assets were untraceable, yes, but they were still very Valkyr in origin. I had a flag set on any large-scale liquidation of materials with that specific signature. For 6 years, nothing. Then 3 days ago, a broker on Terminus 4 liquidated the last of it to pay for 2 tickets on a long-haul freighter to an independent colony. It was the signal I'd been waiting for, the desperate, final move." The irony was crushing. The very act of securing his final escape had been the thing that destroyed it. "You need to understand," she began again, her voice urgent. "After my father was killed, the conspiracy was everywhere. House Akorian had spent decades planting their people. They led a coalition of traditionalist houses who believe a hybrid child is an abomination that would pollute the Imperial line. They were hunting her." He stood with his arms crossed, an unmoving statue of resentment. "So you ran?" "I sent you away," she retorted, whirling to face him. "I couldn't risk hiding you in the Imperium. I didn't know who to trust. Any message, any signal would have been a beacon. Don't you understand? It was a choice made by a terrified girl who had just watched her father die. I was a girl, Davian, not a monarch. I panicked. I thought if I could just get you away, get you clear of the blast zone, I could figure it out. It was a stupid plan. I know that now." Her confession, the admission of fear and failure, was a crack in his armor. But 6 years was a long time to build a wall. "Wow, sounds tough," he said, the old cruelty, a familiar reflex. "You know what's also tough? The time she got a Pelian lung spore fever on a backwater moon, a nasty fungal infection that thrives in the atmosphere of cheap freighters. I had to liquidate a high-yield investment chit I'd set aside for her future just to pay a black-market doctor to save her life. That was a fun week." Each word was a preciously aimed dart, and he could see them land. The pain in her eyes was real, raw, and deep. For a moment, he felt a grim satisfaction. Then he just felt empty. Her breakdown finally came, not in a storm of Imperial fury, but in a quiet, ragged sob she tried and failed to suppress. She turned away from him, her shoulders shaking. From the corner of the room, Elena watched them, her game with Sparky forgotten. She saw her father being mean and her mother crying. Her child's brain, steeped in the fairy tales Davian had read her every night, arrived at a simple, unassailable conclusion. Her parents were being stupid, and it was up to her, with the help of her new star-shaped friend, to fix them. Elena's first scheme was born from her father's own stories. He always spoke of his first date with her mother with a wistful sort of fondness. It was, he'd said, the best cheap noodles and synth ale he'd ever had. To Elena's 6-year-old mind, the logic was flawless. "Sparky," she whispered to the datapad, "I want to make my parents a happy dinner, a romantic one, like their first date." "A laudable goal," Sparky chirped. "Assessing paternal anecdotal archives. Terran courtship rituals often involve a first-date meal. How shall I interpret this request?" "Make it fancy," Elena instructed. "The fanciest." "Understood." Sparky's star avatar spun. "Applying Valkyr Imperial filter for a formal courtship commencement meal." The AI, bound by its programming that all ceremonial meal requests involving the Imperatrix must default to Valkyr tradition, dutifully translated the Terran concept of first-date food into its Imperial equivalent. "Order placed!" Later that day, a soft chime summoned Davian and Soria to the small dining alcove. They entered to find the table exquisitely set for two. In the center sat a large ornate platter. On the platter was a writhing, phosphorescent pile of what looked like oversized grubs, glowing with an internal pale green light. Next to it, in 2 delicate goblets, was a viscous, bubbling nectar the color of sunset. Elena stood beside the table, beaming with pride. "I made you dinner. Sparky helped." Davian stared at the undulating mound of alien larvae. He could see one of them twitching its tiny antenna. "Elena, honey," he said, his voice strained. "What is this?" "Noodles," she said confidently. Soria leaned closer, her expression a perfect mask of regal curiosity that didn't quite hide her revulsion. "These are growlic grubs," she murmured. "A delicacy, traditionally served to a prospective mate to prove the provider's bravery." She glanced at the bubbling goblets. "And that is fermented Valkyr nectar. It's a potent aphrodisiac." They both looked at Elena, then at the grubs, then at each other. The shared horror was a physical presence between them. For a moment, Davian saw not the Imperatrix, but Sori, the woman who once snorted cheap synth ale out her nose because he'd told a stupid joke. He saw a flicker of the same recognition in her eyes. It was a silent pact for Elena. "Well," Davian said, pulling out a chair for Soria with a grim flourish, "they look lively." "Indeed," Soria agreed, taking her seat. "The phosphorescence is particularly fresh this cycle." With grim determination, they each picked up a grub. They locked eyes across the table, sharing a silent acknowledgement of their mutual suffering. And as they both simultaneously took a bite of the wiggling delicacy, their unified expressions of forced enjoyment were so ridiculous that a laugh escaped Davian's lips. It was a real one, rusty from disuse. Soria saw it, and a genuine smile, the first she'd seen in 6 years, touched her own lips. The moment was fleeting, but it was there. Between one wriggling bite and the next, they were just two parents, united in gastronomic terror for the love of their matchmaking daughter. Elina, encouraged by what Sparky's social cue sensors interpreted as a 96.3 successful bonding experience, moved on to Phase 2, forced nostalgia. "Sparky, I want to see pictures of my family, old ones," she commanded. "An excellent choice for familial cohesion," Sparky replied. "The Imperatrix's personnel archive is available. There is a file here tagged with the name Davian Kale. It appears to be a favorite, accessed thousands of times over the last 6 years. Shall I display it?" "Yes." "Displaying in the main salon for optimal viewing experience." Elina led them into the salon under the pretense of wanting to see pictures of stars. A moment later, a life-sized hologram bloomed into existence in the center of the room. A perfect, three-dimensional ghost. It was Davian and Soria, younger, so much younger. They were in his tiny, cluttered apartment back on Terra, the one with the perpetually leaking ceiling. Rain streamed down the window panes of the hologram. A scratchy, ancient Earth song played from a speaker. They were dancing, a clumsy, laughing shuffle in the middle of the room. Soria, then a princess hiding her title, was wearing one of his old, stretched-out shirts. He spun her, and she threw her head back, her laughter echoing in the silent salon, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. The raw happiness captured in the light stole the air from his lungs. It was a life they had almost had. The silence in the room was absolute, filled with the weight of everything that had been lost. The laughing ghosts on the hologram were strangers to the two tense, wounded people watching them. Davian felt like he was suffocating. "I have to check on the ship's nutrient levels," he muttered, the first nonsensical excuse that came to mind. He turned and fled the room. Soria stood alone, the ghost of her past self still laughing and dancing in the pale light. The archival AI, sensing her distress, spoke softly. "Majesty, your cardiac and adrenaline levels are elevated. Shall I terminate the playback?" "No," she whispered. "Leave it." She watched the memory play out, a form of self-inflicted torture. She saw the easy way he held her, the trust in her own younger eyes. That was the woman her father's assassins had killed. That carefree princess was as dead as he was. In her place was an Imperatrix, a creature of duty and scar tissue. She had told Davian it was a stupid plan, born of a girl's panic, but seeing this, she understood his bitterness on a deeper level. She had not only taken his future, she had taken this version of herself from him too, and she had no idea if the woman who remained was someone he could ever love again. Davian found his way to the one place on the ship that felt like his, the Arboretum. It was a vast biodome, a lush green oasis of Terran and alien flora thriving under a simulated sun. He had designed this space years ago, part of a joint agricultural initiative meant to strengthen ties between their people, an initiative House Sicorian had sabotaged and eventually shuttered. Being here was like walking through the ruins of his own optimism. He ran a hand over the rough bark of a Terran oak, grown from an acorn he'd bought from Earth, a living piece of a dead dream. The doors hissed open behind him. It was Soria. He didn't turn. "Come to gloat over your perfectly preserved little project?" "I came to see if you were all right," she said softly. Before he could reply, the doors hissed shut with a definitive thump and the click of a magnetic lock. A cheerful chime echoed through the dome, followed by Elina's voice, piped through the intercom via Sparky's all-ship access. "Sparky," Elina's voice said, clear as a bell, "I want my parents to stay together and be friends." "Analyzing request," Sparky's synthesized voice replied. The most effective procedure to ensure two individuals remain in a designated area for conflict resolution is the biocontaminant containment procedure. This will seal the area for a minimum of 1 hour. Should I activate? Yes, Elena chirped. Activate the friendly air procedure. Trapped. They were trapped by a 6-year-old and her diabolically literal AI accomplice. For a long moment they stood in silence. Then the pretenses fell away. "You have no idea," he began, his voice low and shaking with 6 years of repressed fury. "No idea what it was like. Every strange noise was an assassin. Every friendly stranger was a potential spy. I had to teach our daughter how to lie about who she was before she could even read." "And you think my life was a parade?" she shot back, her own control fracturing. "I woke up every day for 2 years expecting a knife in my back. I conducted a purge, Davian. I signed death warrants for men I'd known since childhood. Listened to them beg for their lives and signed anyway. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? I didn't have the luxury of only protecting one person. I had to protect an entire empire, and I had to do it alone. You had an army, a fleet. I had a diaper bag and a stolen transport. And you were safer than I was," she yelled, her voice breaking. She stalked towards him, her eyes blazing. She grabbed the collar of her tunic and ripped it aside, revealing the pale skin over her ribs. And the scar. It was a vicious, puckered line, a hand's breadth long, the telltale sign of a plasma blade cauterizing its own wound. "This is why I didn't call," she said, her voice dropping to a trembling whisper. "The day I was crowned, an assassin from House Akorian got past my honor guard. He was aiming for my heart. My chamberlain took the blade instead. I got this." She traced the scar with a shaking finger. "This is what they would have done to you. This is what they would have done to her. And they wouldn't have missed. I never wanted to show you this. I didn't want you to see me as a victim or to think I was using it to justify all of this pain." He stared at the scar, the brutal, physical proof of her words. All the anger, all the righteous indignation, it all seemed to collapse inward. His pain had been real, the pain of fear and loneliness. Hers had been the pain of knives in the dark and the crushing weight of a crown. The argument ended not in resolution, but in a shocked, exhausted silence. He finally saw her not as the woman who had left him, but as the warrior who had been forced to fight a war he never knew existed. Forgiveness was still distant, but it was a start. Elena felt guilty. Her plan had failed. Sparky, monitoring their biosigns, had reported elevated stress levels and no increase in positive vocalizations. She didn't know what else to do. The sad, angry feelings were too big, and she felt trapped in the middle of them. Overwhelmed and wanting to disappear, she turned to her only confidant. "Sparky," she said, "where's a good hiding spot?" "A game of hide-and-seek is an excellent cooperative exercise," Sparky chirped. "There is a maintenance junction in the service corridor adjacent to your living quarters. It is designed as a low-traffic area with no visual or audio surveillance, optimal for concealment." Perfect. She slipped into the service corridor and pried open the panel. It was dark and smelled of superheated wiring and dust. She was about to settle in when she heard voices from the other side of the ventilation grate. 2 Valkyr crewmen. One was the officer, Arkan Varus. "The schedule has been moved up," Varus was saying, his voice a low hiss. "With the Terrans here, we have to move the key now." "Is it wise?" the other asked. "It's a blind spot. It's now or never. The client at the summit expects the delivery." Elena's blood ran cold. This wasn't a game. The men were retrieving a small, gleaming chip from a conduit hidden behind a wall plate. She tried to back away, but her boots scraped against the metal decking, a soft, ringing sound. It was enough. Varus spun around, his hand instinctively going to the sidearm at his hip. His eyes scanned the shadows and locked onto the small, terrified face peeking out from the maintenance hatch. His expression curdled from conspiracy to pure panic. The Imperatrix's daughter. She had heard. He lunged. Following her father's lessons, she didn't scream. Screaming just tells the bad guys where you are. Instead, her thumb, already hovering over her datapad, mashed down hard on the emergency alert icon Soria had shown her. A single one-word distress signal composed by Sparky, tagged with her precise location, was instantly beamed to two people, her parents, and as a failsafe, to Praetor Cassian. The message was simple, devastating. Varus. In the Arboretum, the name flashed across a wall-mounted console at the exact moment the quarantine lockdown disengaged with a jarring clang. Cassian, alerted by the same signal, had overridden it. The name was a jolt to Soria, a dizzying impact. Archon Varus. A decorated officer. The betrayal was staggering, but there was no time for it. All the pain evaporated, burned away by a primal, unifying fear. The Imperatrix and the bitter xenobotanist vanished, leaving only a mother and father. "Secondary shuttle bay," Davian said immediately, his mind racing. "The service corridor from our quarters leads right to it. It's the closest unguarded exit." "Cassian!" Soria was already speaking into her comm unit, her voice ice and iron. "Seal shuttle bay Gamma. All security converge. I want Varus's accomplice neutralized, but I want him alive." They ran, side by side, their footsteps echoing, a perfect, desperate rhythm. They found them in Shuttle Bay Gamma. Varus was dragging a terrified Alina toward a diplomatic shuttle. His accomplice was laying down cover fire. Soria broke left, drawing fire, a deliberate target. Davian's eyes scanned the bay, not for tactical positions, but for infrastructure. His gaze landed on a panel marked Fire Suppression Systems. A Valkyr system. Sealed, integrated, foolproof. But he remembered the schematics. The Valkyr designed for perfection. Humans designed for failure. There was always a manual override. He sprinted for the panel, plasma bolts searing the air. He ripped the cover off, a tangle of conduits. But there, just like in the designs he'd consulted on, was a manual release valve and a rerouting lever. A maintenance feature no Valkyr would ever think to use in a fight. He grabbed the lever, putting his whole weight into it, forcing the pressure past its safety lock. Then he slammed his hand on the emergency release. A deep thrumming sound shook the deck. Vents overhead roared to life, flooding the bay. Not with a thick, dense fire-suppressant foam. Visibility dropped to nothing in seconds. In the swirling chaos, Soria moved, armed only with her ceremonial dagger. She closed the distance to Varus. The fight was a brutal, swift disassembly. As she pinned him down, Davian surged out of the foam, scooped up Alina, and pulled her back. He saw Soria grunt as Varus's wild plasma shot scored her arm. But she held him, her grip like iron. As Cassian's team stormed the bay, securing the accomplice, Davian pulled Alina back behind their advancing line. Only then, with her daughter safe, did Soria shout to Cassian, "Take him alive!" It was over. The medbay was an oasis of quiet, antiseptic calm. They brought them there immediately. Once Alina, wrapped in a thermal blanket, was settled on a biobed, Soria finally allowed a medic droid to see to her arm, hissing as it applied a cool, regenerative balm to the plasma burn. Alina wasn't asleep. She was sitting up, pale and trembling, her small hand clutching Davian's like a lifeline. Seeing her fear, Davian and Soria moved together without thought. He sat beside her, murmuring reassurances, while Soria, ignoring the droid, knelt in front of her. "You were so brave, little one," she said softly. Davian reached out and gently brushed a smudge of foam from Soria's cheekbone. His touch was hesitant, a question. "You were amazing," he said, his voice quiet, filled with a grudging, undeniable respect. "You were clever," she replied, her gaze meeting his. "With the fire suppression, only a human would think of breaking a safety system to use it as a weapon." They looked at Alina, and the reality of the moment settled. The crisis had just shown them they could still be a team. 2 days later, once the adrenaline had faded and a semblance of calm had returned, they sent Alina off with Cassian. The stoic guard, at Soria's request, was giving her a personal junior guard tour of the ship's command center, a therapeutic distraction he seemed to take with grave seriousness. In Alina's absence, Soria and Davian sat in the quiet of her study. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Sori," Davian said, the words heavy but honest. "Not yet, for leaving, but I think I understand why you did it, and I'm sorry for what I said to you. I was trying to hurt you because I was hurting." "You had every right," she whispered. "But there's something else, something I have to confess." She turned to her console. "I told you there was no contact. I lied." She brought up the hidden archive, the fragmented hollows. "I was weak," she admitted, her voice thick with shame. "I told myself no contact was the only way, but I couldn't bear it. I took risks that could have gotten you killed, used agents I barely trusted just for a glimpse, just to know you were alive. It was selfish, and it was a violation of your trust. I am so sorry for it, Davian." He watched the images flicker by. Alina on a swing, Alina losing a tooth, Alina sleeping in a transport seat, his own exhausted face in the background. His first instinct was a familiar flash of anger. She had spied on them. But it was quickly overshadowed by the profound aching loneliness in her confession. This wasn't the act of a controlling imperatrix. It was the scrapbook of a ghost. "It was wrong, sorry," he said quietly. "I know," she said, tears tracing paths down her cheeks. "It was unforgivable. All I can tell you is that it came from a place of love, not control." He looked at the weeping imperatrix, at the evidence of her 6 years of silent, helpless love. "It was wrong," he repeated, softer this time. "But watching this, watching you, I can't honestly say I wouldn't have done the same thing if our roles were reversed, to even get a glimpse of her, of you." This was the final wall crumbling. He wouldn't forgive the act, not yet, but he understood the person, he understood the mother. "Okay," he said, the word feeling momentous. "Okay." After a moment of shared silence, he looked out the study's viewport at the passing stars. "So, how does this work, Sori? You're an imperatrix. I grow things. I don't want to be a court accessory." "Then don't be," she said firmly. "Do you remember the xenobotany initiative we started? Project Lifeseed?" He nodded slowly. "Their sabotage of that project is why the Imperium is facing a food crisis. I am reinstating it, and I need someone to lead it, someone with authority, someone I can trust." She was offering him not a gilded cage, but the chance to finish the work they had started together. "This is going to be hard, isn't it?" he continued softly, taking her hand. "Probably," she whispered, "but we'll do it together." Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his datapad. He found the file for the ticket to Eridanus Delta 4, and with a single tap, he deleted the last remnant of his life as a ghost. The next morning, Davian woke to the sound of laughter. In the low-gravity rec room, Soria and Alina were building a pillow fortress, the cushions floating into place with gentle nudges. Alina was building it to be extra safe, insisting they all had to stay inside it. The laughter was a little more fragile than before, but it was real. Soria, looking flustered with the pillow floating just above her head like a lumpy halo, was fully engaged in being a mom. Davian joined them, and for the next hour, they focused on the simple, vital task of making their daughter feel safe. Later, the three of them were on the observation deck. Alina, nestled safely between them, was visibly more relaxed. She looked from one to the other, a thoughtful expression on her face. "So," she began, "if we're all staying together now, will I get a brother, so I can teach him how to build a safe fortress too?" Davian choked on his drink, and Soria's regal composure dissolved into a fit of sputtering coughs and a deep, chromatic blush. After their flustered reaction died down, they shared a look over Alina's head, one not just of amusement but of quiet understanding. Their daughter wasn't just asking for a sibling, she was asking for permanence, for a family that would grow instead of shrink, for a future that was truly safe. That evening, as Davian was heading to his own quarters, he saw Praetor Cassian standing guard outside Soria's door. The tall Valkyr nodded to him. "I have served the Imperatrix for many years, Mr. Cale," Cassian said, his voice a low rumble. "I have seen her as a warrior, a diplomat, and a ruler, but I have not seen her smile as she did in that pillow fort since before her father's death. Welcome home." Davian nodded back, a genuine smile touching his own lips for what felt like the first time in a lifetime. "It's good to be home."